Imagine walking into your own store only to be mistaken for a thief. This story will make you rethink the assumptions we all make and the impact they have on respect and understanding. The automatic doors slid open with a faint hum, and Samuel stepped inside Martin's supermarket in Fairfax, Virginia. His tailored grey blazer stood out against the casual attire of weekend shoppers. His presence, though calm and composed, seemed to ripple through the space. He wasn't here to browse the aisles aimlessly. This visit had a purpose. Samuel walked with a measured pace, his eyes scanning the aisles, as though he were observing more than just the products. He nodded briefly to an elderly man, shuffling past with a basket of oranges, then moved toward the produce section. His shoes clicked softly against the polished floor, a sound that seemed louder in the otherwise mundane bustle of the store. Behind the register, a young cashier nudged her colleague, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know that guy? He's been walking around like he's up to something." Her co-worker glanced over, shrugged and muttered, "I've never seen him before. Maybe he's just looking for something." But the whispers didn't stop there. As Samuel reached for a Granny Smith apple, another employee, a stocky man with a name tag reading Carl, approached cautiously. His expression was neutral, but his body language betrayed a hint of unease. "Excuse me, sir," Carl said, his voice steady but firm. "Do you need help finding anything?" Samuel turned, his expression polite but puzzled. "No, thank you. I'm just looking around." Carl hesitated, as though weighing his next words carefully. "It's just that you've been walking around for a while. Are you sure there's nothing you're looking for?" Samuel's brow furrowed, and his tone sharpened just slightly. "I'm sure. Is there a problem?" The tension in the air thickened, palpable even to the shoppers passing by. A woman with a cart full of groceries paused mid-step, her eyes darting between the two men. Another customer leaned closer to a shelf, pretending to read the labels, but clearly eavesdropping. Samuel exhaled, his patience wearing thin. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone to check a notification. But Carl's eyes followed the motion, and his jaw tightened. "So I'm going to have to ask you to step over here," Carl said, gesturing toward the customer service counter. But Samuel didn't move, his calm demeanor unwavering. As the quiet buzz of the supermarket turned into a murmuring hum of suspicion, Samuel stood his ground, his calm presence contrasting sharply with Carl's growing insistence. A few shoppers had stopped entirely now, their curiosity outweighing their errands. From the corner of his eye, Samuel noticed another employee speaking into a small radio, summoning the store manager. "I'm not sure why this is necessary," Samuel said evenly, meeting Carl's gaze. "I told you I'm just looking around." Carl crossed his arms. "We have policies, sir. If we notice unusual behavior, we're obligated to investigate unusual behavior." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I've picked up one apple. Is that your concern?" The quiet murmur of the store grew louder. A teenage boy whispered to his mother, who quickly shushed him. An elderly woman near the bakery section squinted, trying to get a better view of the commotion. By now the store's manager, a wiry man in his mid-40s named Greg, had arrived. His tie was slightly askew, and the tension in his posture made it clear he had been briefed hastily. "What seems to be the problem here?" Greg asked, stepping between Carl and gestured towards Samuel. "This gentleman has been wandering the aisles and acting suspicious. I think we need to check his bags." Samuel blinked, incredulous. "I don't even have bags." Greg hesitated, his eyes scanning Samuel from head to toe. He took in the tailored blazer, the polished shoes, the expensive watch peeking out from under his sleeve. For a moment, it seemed as though he might de-escalate the situation. But then Greg's tone shifted, cautious but firm. "Sir, We'd like to take a closer look just to clear this up. Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced around at the gathering crowd, the sea of faces watching him, like he was some kind of spectacle. He could feel the weight of their assumptions pressing against him, silent, but loud enough to drown out any rational explanation. "I see," Samuel said quietly. "And what exactly are you looking for?" Greg shifted uncomfortably. "We're just doing our due diligence. If you cooperate, this will be over quickly." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. A middle-aged man in a flannel shirt muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. Samuel sighed, setting the apple back on the pile. He reached into his jacket pocket again, this time pulling out a slim leather wallet. "Let's save everyone some trouble," Samuel said, flipping it open to reveal a business card. He held it out to Greg, who hesitated before taking it. As Greg's eyes scanned the card, his face turned pale. "Owner," Greg whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked back at Samuel, then at Carl, whose confidence had evaporated. "Yes," Samuel said, his voice carrying just enough weight to command attention. "I own this store." But before anyone could speak, the weight of what had just happened seemed to settle over the entire room, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Greg stood frozen, the business card trembling slightly in his hand. His mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came out. The silence in the supermarket was deafening now, with every shopper and employee trying to process what they had just heard. Carl took a step back, his earlier confidence completely drained. "Wait, you're the owner?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Samuel nodded slowly, his expression calm but firm. "Yes, my name is Samuel Green, and I'm the new owner of Martin's Supermarket. I acquired it just last month." Clearly not everyone was informed. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Greg's face turned an alarming shade of red as he scrambled to regain composure. "Mr. Green, I didn't know. I mean, we weren't told." Samuel raised a hand, silencing him. "It's not about what you didn't know. It's about what you assumed." The crowd began to disperse slightly, some embarrassed by their earlier gawking, others lingering in quiet fascination. An older man in a baseball cap leaned on his cart, muttering, "That's what happens when people jump to conclusions." Greg cleared his throat, glancing nervously at Kyle, who was now staring at the floor. "Mr. Green, I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. We had no intention of stop," Samuel said sharply. "Don't explain it away. I think we all know what this was." Carl's head snapped up, and for a moment he looked as though he might argue. But Samuel's steady gaze left no room for excuses. Greg shifted uncomfortably, glancing around, as if hoping the earth might swallow him whole. Samuel let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He turned to the small crowd that still lingered. "Thank you all for your patience," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I think we've given everyone enough of a show for today." Some nodded, a few murmured awkward apologies, and the crowd began to thin out. But Samuel wasn't done. Turning back to Greg and Carl, he said, "We're not sweeping this under the rug. I'll be calling an all-staff meeting tomorrow to address what happened here and why it should never happen again." But as Samuel walked away, the tension didn't dissipate. It lingered, leaving everyone with the uncomfortable realization that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, but a lesson waiting to be learned the following day. The atmosphere in the supermarket's break room was heavy with tension. Employees sat in a semicircle, some fidgeting with their name tags, others stealing nervous glances at Samuel, who stood at the front of the room. He had traded his blazer for a simple button-down shirt, but his presence was no less commanding. "Thank you all for being here," Samuel began, his tone calm but firm. "Yesterday was uncomfortable, to say the least, and I think we need to talk about why." No one spoke, even Greg, who usually dominated meetings. sat with his hands clasped tightly, his face pale. Samuel let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. Let me start by saying this isn't about assigning blame. It's about understanding the choices we make and the assumptions behind them. Yesterday, I walked into my own store. He paused, letting the words sink in, and was treated like a suspect. Why? Because I didn't look like what you expected an owner to look like. A few heads dropped. Carl shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, as though he wanted to respond, but couldn't find the words. I've reviewed the security footage, Samuel continued. I saw how the whispers started, how the stares lingered, and how the situation escalated. At no point did anyone stop to ask themselves if what they were assuming was fair. He leaned slightly on the edge of the table, his voice softening. I understand that not everyone here knows me yet, but the way I was treated wasn't about familiarity. It was about perception, and that's a problem we need to address. Samuel gestured toward a whiteboard, where he had written two words in bold letters: implicit bias. Let's talk about this, he said, his eyes scanning the room. Bias isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's subtle. It's the quick judgment you make when someone doesn't fit into a box you've created in your mind. But those small judgments can have big consequences. A young cashier raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Green, I think a lot of us didn't even realize what we were doing. It's like it just happened. Samuel nodded. That's exactly why we're talking about it. Awareness is the first step. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. The room was silent again, but this time it felt less tense and more reflective. Samuel picked up a marker and wrote a question on the board. What assumptions do we make without realizing it? Let's hear from you, he said, turning back to the group. What comes to mind? At first no one spoke. Then Carl, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, cleared his throat. I assumed someone dressed like you wouldn't be the owner. That's on me. I wasn't thinking. Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful. Thank you for saying that. And it's not just about me. It's about how we treat anyone who walks through those doors. Every customer, every colleague deserves respect. He glanced at Greg, who finally spoke up. This was a wake-up call. We need to do better. Not just for you, but for everyone. Samuel straightened, a small but genuine smile breaking through his serious demeanor. That's the point. We can do better. And it starts with conversations like this. But as the meeting ended and the employees filed out, their expressions thoughtful and subdued, it was clear the lesson had only just begun. Over the next week, Samuel implemented a series of changes that rippled through the store's operations. He began with the basics: mandatory training, sessions on implicit bias and customer interaction. Employees were encouraged to share their experiences, not just in the workplace, but in their daily lives. These sessions weren't lectures, they were conversations. Samuel kicked off the first session himself, standing in front of a diverse group of staff members. I want this place to be more than just a supermarket, he said, his voice steady but passionate. It should be a space where everyone feels valued, staff and customers alike. The training included real-life scenarios. One exercise had employees split into small groups to discuss how they would handle specific situations, like a teenager browsing expensive items, or an elderly woman lingering near the checkout without purchasing anything. For many, these discussions were eye-opening. I didn't realize how often I make assumptions, said Rachel, a part-time cashier in her 20s. It's not something I'm proud of, but I'm glad we're talking about it. Carl, who had been visibly hesitant during the first meeting, surprised everyone by taking an active role. I thought I understood people, he admitted, but these conversations made me realize how much I still have to learn. The changes didn't stop with the staff. Samuel also installed a suggestion box near the entrance, inviting customers to share their experiences. Anonymously, a sign next to the box read, "Help us improve, your voice matters." To his surprise, many of the notes praised the staff for their recent warmth and attentiveness, a testament to how quickly the environment had shifted. One Saturday afternoon, Samuel held an open meeting for the local community. In the store's parking lot, he stood on a small platform, addressing a crowd of shoppers, employees, and passers-by. "We all have blind spots," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the gathering. "The important thing is what we do when we see them. This store isn't just about transactions. It's about people. And every person who walks through those doors deserves kindness, respect, and fairness." The crowd applauded, some nodding in agreement, others visibly moved by his words. Samuel stepped down from the platform, shaking hands and thanking attendees for their support. As the meeting dispersed, a middle-aged woman approached him, with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for doing this," she said. "I've been coming to this store for years, and it feels different now, in a good way." Samuel smiled, his heart swelling with quiet pride. "That's all I wanted, to make a difference." But even as the store began to thrive under its new leadership, Samuel knew that real change wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuous effort, a daily choice to see people for who they truly are. Months later, Martin's supermarket was unrecognizable, not because of renovations or new products, but because of its atmosphere. The tension and mistrust that once lingered had been replaced by a sense of warmth and inclusivity. Employees greeted every customer with genuine smiles, and shoppers often stopped to chat with staff, creating a community-like feel. Samuel was standing near the checkout lanes one afternoon, observing the flow of the store. A young boy ran up to him, tugging at his sleeve. "Are you the owner?" the boy asked, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. Samuel chuckled, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. "I am. Why do you ask?" "My mom says you're the guy who made this place nicer," the boy said with a shy smile. Behind him, his mother gave a sheepish wave. Samuel stood, his expression softening. "Well, it wasn't just me. It was everyone here," he said, gesturing toward the bustling employees. "It takes a team to make a real change." The boy nodded solemnly, as if taking in a profound truth, and skipped back to his mother. Samuel watched them leave, his heart swelling with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Later that evening, as he locked up the store, Samuel paused to reflect. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation had blossomed into something far greater. It wasn't just about fixing a single incident. It was about creating a culture that valued empathy over assumptions, fairness over fear. In his final act of the night, Samuel picked up a marker and wrote on the employee message board, in bold letters, "Respect is the foundation of every great team. Let's keep building." As he turned off the lights, he smiled. This wasn't just a job or a store. It was a legacy, and he intended to ensure it was one worth leaving behind. This story highlights the power of awareness, humility, and teamwork. By addressing our biases with honesty and empathy, we can create environments where everyone feels respected and included. If this story touched you, take a step to challenge your own assumptions and inspire understanding in your community. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking stories. And let's keep the dialogue alive.